For the past few years, I've watched the unfolding debate about the quality of movies, television, and even video games unfold across social media. These days, I think it's harder than ever to avoid the ongoing discussion about where some of these mediums have gone. Most days, it seems like everyone has a take on something. Personally, the idea of getting behind a microphone and sharing my opinion with the rest of the world was never at the top of my list. Then I unfortunately made the decision to check out a particular TV show. Look, you all saw the title. Anyone clicking on the video knows exactly what's about to go down. But before we get started on looking over the most convoluted, poorly written mess I've ever encountered in Paramount's Halo TV show, I just wanted to take the chance to introduce not only myself, but this brand new channel I've started alongside a few friends of mine. Hi, the name's Grim, and welcome to A Nuisance Media, the only channel where you'll find no professionalism, no quality, and all minorities. So, in light of making the decision to create a video about this show and talk about my reasons for not liking it, I think it's only right to give everyone context as to why I decided to step into the abyss known as YouTube, and that revolves around my experience with Halo over the years. The first ever game I played in the series was Halo 3. It was fun and I enjoyed my time with the game as well as the story before I eventually sold it to GameStop. Look, in my defense, I was young, but I definitely gained an interest in seeing what else Halo had to offer, which led to me discovering Halo Wars. From there, I began scouring the internet for anything related to Halo. In my search, it led to me discovering the community built around the franchise. Whether it's the fan made films people created and posted on YouTube, or the lore videos that go over every minute detail within the in game universe, all of this did one thing. It showed a community filled with people passionate about Halo. A passion people wanted to see in an official film or television adaptation. So when the news was announced Paramount was doing just that, I became curious about how it might turn out. You can't blame a guy for being interested in something like this. However, when information about the show started coming out and quotes that didn't exactly paint the creators in a good light, that's when things started going downhill. And as anyone can tell from the reception towards the show, Halo didn't exactly go the way everyone was expecting. I think the best way to describe the show is if someone built a house without the foundations. Like a house of cards, it collapsed on itself as each episode released. Adding more fuel to the fire was the CBS response towards some people talking about the show in a negative light. All around, the show was a disaster in so many ways. And that is what we're going to be discussing today. So, why don't we kick the video off talking about the Covenant and how they've been represented in the show so far? Now, I'm going to state something very controversial. It is my belief that I think the writers do not understand the Covenant and do not understand why they were made the way they were in the original games. On the surface, the design and quality of the various species within the religious hegemony look very good and are pretty accurate to their designs from the games. The only things to point out is the odd choice for the armor of the elites and maybe the interior of High Charity seen within an early episode. Beyond those choices, there's nothing that truly goes against what's been established. The Covenant are slaughtering humans in droves, glassing human worlds, and searching for any and all Forerunner artifacts that will lead them to the rings. Everything seems right, doesn't it? Well, that's not actually the case. It's once you start digging deeper into them and actually think, you start to find the choices made by the writers are difficult, if not impossible, to explain or rationalize based on what we know about them as a faction. Originally, within the canon timeline, the prophets had declared a holy war against humanity, unleashing the full might of the Covenant war machine in order to accomplish their mission. But things were a lot more complicated than a holy war. It had everything to do with the prophets discovering humanity's connection to the Forerunners and how humanity is supposed to reclaim the legacy left behind by the ancient civilization. The true reason behind the war against humanity was out of a desire for the prophets to maintain control of the covenant, which was based on falsehood. The problem is, Makee's mere existence as a member is a greater threat than any Spartan or warship or Mac gun in the UNSC's arsenal. Her backstory as someone raised by one of the prophets themselves goes against every decision they've made, none bigger than their very reason to wage war. 30 years of carefully constructed lying could be torn apart at any moment if anyone within the Covenant starts asking too many questions. In the canon timeline, some elites started to do that very thing, asking why humanity couldn't be allowed to join. In spite of their harsh opinions of humans, they witnessed a race showing a determination to survive in the face of overwhelming odds. So why wouldn't the elites of this universe do the exact same thing? Makee would only serve to reinforce their viewpoint that humanity can exist within the Covenant. Now, you might say, Grim, it was only the first season. Maybe they'll expand on their reasoning since a second season was announced. Or, none of it matters anymore because of what happened to Makee at the end of the first season. My response to those arguments is very simple. The Human Covenant War has been raging for nearly 30 years, especially by this point in the show's timeline. There has been more than enough time for some within the Covenant to start asking questions. In Halo 2, we witness an elite who knows the truth regarding the Forerunners and the Rings being branded as a heretic. That individual was soon taken out by the Arbiter. Who sent him? The Prophets. Every single decision made by the Covenant leadership is to contain the truth. Now, this leads to another problem regarding the Covenant of this particular timeline, and it's their lack of a presence in the show. Throughout 9 episodes, there's only 3 major Covenant encounters. However, in my mind, it's the manner in which those encounters are treated that made me question if the Human Covenant War was anywhere close to the scale of the canon timeline. Were the Covenant less of a threat? Was it more of a Cold War? Or did humanity and the Covenant not interact anywhere as much as they did in the original? This show made me ask questions it probably wouldn't be answering anytime soon or at any point in reality. I think the first episode especially highlighted how the Covenant seemed to be an afterthought. Humanity treated the entire incident as if it was some minor encounter and not worth worrying about the potential idea of a Covenant fleet coming back at some point. I mean, we eventually see Makee head to that exact same planet to track down the artifact. That same thing happened after episode 5. But what's worse is knowing that only a single Covenant ship, a cruiser, was there to attack the UNSC. Again, I'd imagine a few ships would be spared for such a mission given the stated importance of this particular artifact that was discovered on the outer colony. This is an artifact that was revealed to know the existence of the rings. What further adds to my point and my belief that the writers don't understand the Covenant and don't seem to grasp the full scale of the Human Covenant War is within the first episode alone. The manner in which humanity treated the entire incident in where 24 elites slaughter an entire human settlement and happen to discover that these exact same elites were searching for a Forerunner artifact, the very prize the Covenant hold dear to them, and a prize they're willing to burn entire human worlds in search of. And the fact that the UNSC never bothered to contact that colony and warn them about something happening in the future makes me realize this is not a full-scale war. This might be the occasional excursion into human territory that the Covenant do. I mean, we eventually see Makee return to that exact same colony to try and track down the artifact. I'm sure she has more than there's a few Covenant warships with her. And yet, nothing happens. And the thing is, this exact same thing happened in episode 5. But what's worse is knowing only a single Covenant ship, a cruiser, a more than capable warship in the Covenant fleet that can certainly screw up any UNSC ship, was alone. There was no other ships to support it. Now, I can make that exact same criticism on the side of the UNSC. One frigate to potentially bring back an artifact that is probably worth entire fleets chasing after you? Again, I'd imagine both sides would have more than a few spare ships for such a mission, given the importance of the artifact. And the Covenant had to have known that the UNSC had a presence on the planet. For example, we witnessed in Halo Reach how much the Covenant was willing to expend in order to not only exterminate the humans on the planet, but to try and secure the vast amounts of Forerunner artifacts kept at Oni facilities. You throw in the fact that we only witnessed a single glass world through 9 episodes, makes me wonder if the writers really understood the scale of this conflict and the devastation that these artifacts could bring to a human colony should they be unlucky enough to have one. One of the last points I want to touch on about the Covenant is their lack of depth as a faction. It's virtually non existent in the show, especially in comparison to the UNSC and even some of their insurrectionist forces. Yet, we know the Covenant is far more than just a war machine. We know the Covenant is a society with a caste system. Every species has their role to fill. Grunts and jackals are at the very bottom, used as nothing more than cannon fodder on the battlefield. Meanwhile, brutes and elites stand at the top. When it comes to the elites, they have the honor of being the personal bodyguards of the prophets, the leaders of their faction. What makes this even worse, in my mind, is knowing a television show has the advantage of being able to explore a group like the Covenant far more than a video game might be able to. Time is on their side. In fact, they could have easily shown the discourse within the Covenant about the whole war against humanity. As I stated earlier, in the original timeline, some elites did question why humanity wasn't allowed to join the Covenant. It would have been a perfect opportunity to show what the inner politics of a society like theirs looked like in comparison to the UNSC. Yet all we received instead were bullet sponges and a CGI bad guy for Spartans to take down in battle. What depth they could have added to the Covenant was ignored. All we were left with is a husk that's only goal is to grind humanity into dust when Makee's entire existence should have made some within the Covenant pause and wonder what is truly going on. That, I think, is the saddest part, is I don't have the faith in them to pull off a character like the Arbiter, should he make an appearance in the show. He is yet another character I don't want to see ruined, which unfortunately leads me to my next topic, the Master Chief. Anyone who has played Halo knows exactly who he is and what the man is about. A professional super soldier that can get the job done and has done so repeatedly throughout his service to the UNSC. The man has blown up a Covenant warship, taken on the existential threat known as the Flood, and helped bring an end to the Human Covenant War before humanity and the rest of the galaxy truly lost. Can you see the picture I'm painting for you about a soldier who is more than willing to give himself up to fulfill his duty to protect humanity from any and all threats to it? Well, good, because I definitely know the writers didn't see this picture at all. The Master Chief in the Halo TV show is quite the opposite, in fact. He's rash, arrogant, and downright unfit to serve by the logic of the Spartan program, which I will also be discussing later on. But when we talk about bringing a character like the Master Chief to your television screen, I can't buy the whole different timeline argument to justify the man's behavior as well as his actions throughout the first season. I mean, things are really, really bad when someone is talking about if he committed a war crime by sleeping with our Covenant spy Makee in her room. Do you really think the writers can come up with a good reason for such actions? The answer is no. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't we start from the supposed beginning of the Master Chief and see the differences that occur? In the show, John was a boy who grew up on Aritinus 2 with his family before ultimately meeting Catherine Halsey. However, during their arrival, we get a glimpse of John and see something odd. In the original origin story of John 117, Halsey witnessed him playing some rough ass King of the Hill and won 45 times in that game. He came off as someone willing to do whatever it takes to win, to succeed where others may fail. It's a small moment, but one I think was critical in why Halsey picked him besides just his genetics. But in the show, when we see John playing on some rope bridge and help a kid up before he fell, it doesn't say much that he cares for others, not by the actions of the man throughout the first season. The differences start to become a lot more pronounced as it's revealed Halsey actually visited him on a few occasions and got to know him, which is not the case for anyone familiar with the original story of John 117. The only similarity is correctly guessing the coin toss and was later kidnapped that same year by Oni and became yet another member of the Spartan 2 program. Then we start seeing moments of John throughout his time in the Spartan 2 program and realize how different he was in the show. He was more meek, seemed unwilling to participate, even saying he tried running away at some point. Again, John 117 was the complete opposite. He was like a fish in water and competed to win every time. But he soon learned the value of working together under Chief Petty Officer Franklin Menendez. It's what led to his eventual friendship with some of the other Spartans like Kelly 087 and Sam 034. I think the words of Sam accurately summed up John 117, and they still hold true to this day.
The thing about John is that he really only knew 3 ways to react to people. If you were his superior officer, he obeyed you. If you were in his squad, he would die for you. But if you were a threat, then God help you.
When we take into account the differences in the origin story between the Silver Timeline Master Chief and the main canon timeline, some are going to say these differences in his origin story don't matter, that it wouldn't impact the overall story as long as it remains faithful to Halo. To those individuals, I heavily disagree because the rest of his actions throughout the story further cement the importance of getting the main character's backstory right. Let's fast forward and move on to the big thing, his helmet. A lot has been made about the moment when the Master Chief took off his helmet in the very first episode, which was more than enough to turn people off from the series entirely. Some are going to make the argument he had taken off his helmet in some of the books, and if you played Halo 4, even gotten a glimpse of his face in the legendary ending. I say to those people, correct. The thing is, the situation in the very first episode is different because he's not aboard the Infinity or on a UNSC facility. He's dealing with the daughter of an insurrectionist general. It's a situation in which the idea of taking off his helmet is the very last thing he should be doing or contemplating, especially given his aversion to doing such a thing around others unless necessary. I could even go into the conversation with Quan about when he killed her mother. A conversation, mind you, that was ridiculous considering the Spartan 2 program was made with the intention of putting down human rebellions. The Master Chief himself is no stranger to killing humans as he's done it in the past. Hell, the first 3 humans he killed following his augmentation surgery was 3 ODST soldiers. So to see the show go out of its way to have Quan question his willingness to follow orders feels odd, as I imagine the Master Chief has dealt with insurrectionists that have done the exact same thing in the past to try and make him feel guilty. So the more you dig deeper into their version of the Master Chief, the more I think the writers weren't too interested in writing a proper adaptation of the character and wanted to merely take the Master Chief mantle and make their own version of him, a plan I feel didn't go over too well with the majority of the fan base. But more than just being an insult towards even fan fiction writers, they seemed incapable of writing a masked character whose face is seldom seen or never seen. Here's the thing. You don't need to look far as you have shows like The Mandalorian or films like Viva Vendetta and the Judge Dredd remake to give them an idea as to what to do. Some of these are better than others, but they give an idea as to what you need to do and how to do it. This then leads into the problem with them writing a more emotional and unhinged Master Chief, and that affects his relationship with Cortana, his AI partner from the games, yet another character that has issues. In the beginning, he treats the AI in such a dismissive manner, it confuses me as to why she wants to be around someone like him, why she goes out of her way so much to help him. Hell, I question why his teammates seem so ready to follow him into hell when the man is proven to be the opposite of someone worth following into battle. You add to this his decision to suddenly trust a complete stranger in Makee. It was yet another moment of disbelief for most Halo fans, including myself. I question if this man was fit to be a soldier. In less than 3 episodes, he goes from being distrustful to getting into bed with her. Do you want me to even point out how ridiculous that sounds for a super soldier that has the kind of experience in battle and just leadership that the Master Chief has? Look, I get it's a real blow to the war effort to know the Master Chief ain't a virgin anymore, but we gotta be serious about how moronic that makes him come off as. What makes these moments worse is knowing the writers don't seem to realize John 117 is a soldier who happened to get lucky on a number of occasions. We all know he's done crazy things like, oh, I don't know, this. But he's not some all powerful being. He's not Doctor Strange. He's not the Didact from Halo 4. He's not any of those. The Master Chief is just a soldier at the end of the day. A super soldier to be accurate, but nothing more than that. Then the show decided to go out of their way to say he's something called a Blessed One. Whatever that is supposed to mean, they've already messed up a ton of the Halo lore, so I doubt the Forerunners and the relationship between them and humanity is going to be spared. You add all these points together, and you get a character that shouldn't be considered the Master Chief. In fact, he deserves the nickname the internet has given him so far, called Master Cheeks, one of the most iconic video game characters of all time, and somehow they managed to ruin him when all the Halo fanbase is looking for is a far more polished version of what we saw in Forward Onto Dawn. It is just that simple. While I was immensely disappointed by the portrayal of Master Chief, things don't get any better, as we will be discussing Catherine Halsey, someone who went from being a morally ambiguous character who took part in some awful things while working with Oni, to becoming some type of stereotypical bad guy who goes, all of humanity is bad. Yet anybody who knows a damn thing about Catherine Halsey can tell you, no, she is far from that, and far from ever saying that. In fact, everything she's done has been to empower humanity, and anybody who knows her relationship, especially with John 117, will show you she wants humanity to evolve, wants humanity to improve. And as you can imagine, she's not any better in this show like most of the cast.
It didn't take long for Reach to fall. Our enemy was ruthless, efficient, but they weren't nearly fast enough. For you had already passed the torch, and because of you, we found Halo, unlocked its secrets, shattered our enemy's resolve. Our victory, your victory, was so close. I wish you could have lived to see it. But you belong to Reach. Your body, your armor, all burned and turned to glass. Everything. Except your courage. That you gave to us. And with it, we can rebuild.
Genius, arrogant, amoral, these are but a few words that describe the character that is Catherine Halsey. Within the Halo universe, she is the genius that helped make the Spartan 2 program a reality, and helped develop Cortana, the most advanced AI ever created in humanity's history. We're talking about someone pretty damn important here, who created not only two of the most iconic characters within this universe, but two characters that most of the fan base adore and have come to love over the years. And so you can imagine, being as someone like Catherine Halsey being involved with the Spartan 2 program, she's a pretty complicated character all around. So I think the best possible place to start with is Catherine's relationship with her daughter Miranda, as it will help to illustrate the differences between Canon Halsey and Silver Timeline Halsey. While I understood from the beginning the show was going to include some kind of drama, whether it was the family type, relationship type, friendship type, whatever it will be, I understood that. But what baffled me was their decision to make Catherine belittle her daughter and have absolutely no problems going behind her daughter's back on numerous occasions in the show to screw her over, all for the sake of getting her hands on the Forerunner artifact. Oh, did I also mention that Miranda, originally a ship captain in the original Halo trilogy, was now turned into yet another scientist? Very odd choice, honestly, and one that I think was made out of upping the drama, making it more possible to have, like, interest in the show. Meanwhile, in the canon timeline, Catherine and Miranda had a much colder relationship as the latter stopped speaking to her mother for several years. And so when Catherine eventually found out her daughter was going to go into the Naval Academy and follow her father's footsteps to become a ship captain, Catherine, like a mother, reacted, negatively towards the news and used her influence to get Miranda post away from combat. But what this said to me was that it showed Catherine was still a parent who actually cared for her daughter. While I think a number of us would disagree with her actions, it still says a lot about Catherine and shows that she does care for Miranda in a way. We're even told Catherine, after learning about Miranda's death following the Battle of the Citadel in Halo 3, was crying and whispering her daughter's name. This kind of reaction, I don't think the Catherine from the Silver Timeline would be capable of expressing these kind of emotion. In terms of being a mother, she's already worse by a considerable margin, and that's saying a lot. Well, maybe her relationship with the other characters are better, you're saying.
You serious?
It's not, if you're curious. Doesn't matter if it's Jacob, John, or Cortana. Her relationship with all of these characters are awful. As for the worst, I would have to say John gets shafted the hardest out of the bunch. One of the most difficult parts to accept is seeing Halsey go from someone who seemed to care about the children in the Spartan 2 program and actually feel remorseful about what she was doing to them. Because if any of you know this, she did feel remorse. She did feel, she had to take responsibility for what they were doing to these kids, right? Most of them were 14 by the time they received the augmentation surgery, and a lot of them died in the process, right? She even willingly continued to head up this program because she knew Oni would put someone much more, ruthless than her. And so she willingly took on the burden of accepting these kids their deaths on her shoulder so that they have a chance. It's why Soren, who, is a real character and had what happened, and if she knew that if Oni had replaced her with somebody far more ruthless, Soren would be dead. He wouldn't have gotten a chance to escape like he did in the show. He would have been put 6 feet under by Oni. And yet, what we see in the show is somebody who, sees the trainees and even flat out admitted it in, I believe, the final episode, saying that everything was a means to an end. There's Spartans, her daughter, Jacob, even Cortana feels like a means to an end, right? Whatever the artifact is, that's all she cares about. That's the major problem with Halsey as a character. She takes on the attitude of humanity is bad and doesn't give a justifiable reason, right? She goes on this big spiel about it in one of the late episodes in the season. Does the canon version of Halsey hold a low opinion of people? She does. However, that's where individuals like the Master Chief and others, including Miranda and Jacob, prove that notion wrong. That she has to admit there are individuals, who are above and beyond of what she expects. It's why her faith in the Master Chief above everyone else is so unbelievably rock solid. If you remember the clip from Halo 4, the very beginning of it, that interrogation scene, look what she says to the man about the Master Chief.
Do you believe the Master Chief succeeded because he was, at his core, broken?
What does John have to do with this? You want to replace him?
The Master Chief is dead.
His file reads missing in action.
Catherine. Spartans never die.
Your mistake is seeing Spartans as military hardware. My Spartans are humanity's next step. Our destiny as a species. Do not underestimate them. But most of all, do not underestimate him.
See? This is what I'm talking about. Look, surface level wise, Halsey is an arrogant genius, But it's when she starts to explain her decisions that makes everything so much worse and even more difficult to justify. I can go on and on about why Halsey has been turned into this unrecognizable character. But what's more egregious is knowing that the decisions made at the end have forever changed the Halo storyline, because she was on Reach during the invasion by the Covenant in 2552. She was critical in getting Cortana to look over the information, the Forerunner artifacts. And that's the other thing they did change, and I'm just now realizing this. In Halo Reach, they discovered an entire quote unquote Forerunner city. I'm putting that in quotation marks for but you know, data that she secured from that and that Cortana analyzed led to the events of Halo 1. Because now Halsey is nowhere near Reach and that she had to escape, now we don't even know how the Halo or the invasion of Reach is going to look like when it potentially happens. You know, so if I were you, the audience members who are going to probably watch season 2, I would tell you, if you're thinking about Halo Reach and seeing that, I would be hesitant to I would keep my expectations low. But this is what has been done to Halsey. And so the final character I will be covering will be our brand new character in Makee. When it comes to the Covenant spy known as Makee, there's a lot of things I could say about this character. For starters, she is an idiot. She is cannot seem to make up her mind in any capacity. She almost seems like she's supposed to be this character that's conflicted between, her humanity and her newfound home with the Covenant. I already explained why she shouldn't even have a home in the Covenant, but not going to get into that again. But I'm going to start with this much. The scene in one of the fourth episode, it could be earlier than that. We get a scene of Makee as a child on a dumpster planet. All right, she's with this kid. They're reading a book, and so you know they're showing us this backstory about how she was reading, and this book that she was reading mesmerized her, and it was something she's held on to for all these years, even after being taken in by the Covenant. Add in some random kiss she had with a boy at the age of like 12, I think. I don't know. It was I was like, what the fuck? But whatever. And so you would think this book or this story or something to that effect would have this importance in the story and her character as a whole. Well, that's not exactly the case, because the book gets brought up maybe once by the Master Chief in one of the, when she's captured by the UNSC. And the other thing I also want to point out is how, for once, for the few times in the show, the UNSC actually shows some level of competence, where they question her and they're not very trustful of the woman, right? Same thing with Master Cheeks, but you know what happens? He can't resist himself a couple episodes later, you know? And so we get into this whole thing about, she goes into this big spiel about, being torn apart between, like, her hatred for humanity that she's obviously, has been she's been indoctrinated by the Covenant and the whole holy war against humanity, right? In which she went on that UNSC ship, played off as a prisoner, and then led the worms to literally tore apart the crew. And so you take all this into consideration and you go, she willingly murdered a bunch of UNSC personnel, then meets the Master Cheeks and suddenly goes, I'm in love with you, right? After a few episodes, because you and me, we're the blessed ones. We're special in the universe, right? We're the only ones who can interact with Forerunner technology, which don't even get me started, because that already goes against established Halo lore. But as we have stated earlier, this show threw out Halo lore out the window a very long time ago in the first episode, but I digress. And so, we explore Makee, or rather the puddle that she is as a character, and then, for all this build up as this character who's supposed to be important, this build up of this relationship she has with Master Cheeks, all of it is then wasted at the end of the episode, in which then, she retrieves the artifact, she brings it back to the Covenant, and so this is when it's revealed eventually that the prophets had always intended to kill her. I kind of expected that, but I also kind of thought this was a waste of time for the prophets, but whatever. So, you know, when we get to the ending, she feels conflicted. She feels like, she she has some loyalty to Master Cheeks of all people. However, that loyalty isn't worth a damn because at the end they put a bullet in her brain. All right, I'm just gonna spoil it for those of 5 of you who wanted to see the show but were on the fence about it. Yeah, this character that we witnessed for the first time ever in the Halo universe dies at the end of episode 9 or towards the very end, right? And so one of the only blessed ones we know about in the show is just lying dead on the Covenant planet, right? Her blood out dripping onto the sand. And so I guess what it boils down to is Makee felt like a character that was supposed to be like this bridge between humanity and the Covenant to show somebody conflicted between two warring factions. The other concern I have is I have a sneaking suspicion she was originally intended in some way to kind of be like the arbiter. And I have a feeling that they may have kind of pulled back on that idea by killing her at the end because I don't think they would have understood the kind of frustration and outrage they would have generated if they had even approached that idea, which is why I think she was killed at the end. So, Makee isn't a very complicated character in the grand scheme of things within the Halo universe because she's frankly not a character that is anywhere within Halo lore, right? Have there been cases of humans taken prisoner by the Covenant? There's only a few instances where it's purely out of information and or they're being fed to the brutes and some of the other members of the Covenant. Other than that, humans being taken prisoner by the Covenant is not really a thing. And so her existence, as I stated earlier, is a contradiction of the Covenant and the Prophet's plan. So this is a section I like to call a believable Halo universe. It's a topic to me because when you look at the show in an overall viewpoint, you you just have to look at the universe and go, is this really a Halo universe? My answer to that question is hell no. Okay? One of the big things I want to touch on is a moment in the show, right? I don't remember what episode specifically, it might have been 6 or 7, I'm not completely sure, in which for the first time ever we shockingly get the images of a glassed planet. Now, this is an odd thing to me given the enormous Covenant war machine and how planets were being in the outer colony were being glassed at a pretty decent clip. So, in all franklihood, there should have been more than maybe a couple of planets glassed within the time frame of the show. Now, you may make the argument maybe it was within a couple days or a few weeks. I'm like, okay, I'd give you that. But the problem is that it's the reaction from the UNSC personnel that make me almost go, this is not something they're used to, right? Jacob is the only one that makes me go, okay, maybe he's seen a glass planet prior in his career in the war against the Covenant. However, the reaction from everyone else just feels like this is the first time this is ever happening. This is the first time they've ever seen footage. Now, how they got footage of a glass planet, in which probably maybe still has a couple of Covenant warships in the area, that's a little beyond me, but that's whatever, right? And the other thing I want to touch on, because again, I didn't know if this fit into the first topic of this whole thing about the Covenant, is almost their how casual they were about the entire thing, because episode 5 had a decent fight scene, I'll give it that much, but when it comes to anything related to Forerunner stuff, the Covenant don't hold back. They're unwilling to hold anything back, right? They don't want these holy artifacts to be tarnished by the hands of humanity. And so to kind of only bring one ship to bear, a few dozen troops into battle, no heavy equipment like raids, ghost, scarabs, none of that is brought to bear in any capacity. And so it almost makes me go, look, I guess the argument really is budget, but at the same time though is I don't think it would be impossible to maybe put on screen a couple more Covenant ships to at least make it look like the Covenant understand what's, the importance of this, to show you that the Covenant are serious about regaining this artifact and, bringing it under their control, right? Now, one other thing did happen at the very end of that fight. A spirit came down when the artifact was tossed away from, because a banshee had crashed into the warthog carrying the artifact, knocked it away from everybody else in the middle of the field, or of the mine, or whatever it was. And so a certain looking brute comes down and, gets the artifact back and knocks away the Master Chief. Now, for anybody familiar with Halo lore in any capacity, especially the recent 343 additions to the lore, any look, it looks pretty damn similar. I think it's probably the brute is most likely Atriox, who was introduced in Halo Wars 2. Now you might be saying, well, what's the importance of this information? The importance of this information is that if that really is Atriox, I genuinely think the writers ignored even what 343 told them, because Atriox by this point in time should not be with the Covenant, because it was stated by the AI, I believe her name was Isabel, flat out stated in Halo Wars 2 when she was retrieved by Jerome from the research facility, stating that that the Covenant had two targets during those years: humanity and the Banished, who was led by Atriox. So during the Human Covenant War, Atriox by this point has split off from the Covenant, has created the Banished, and was tearing apart the Covenant behind their lines or wherever he was within the wider galaxy. So again, the writers of this show even ignored information that probably 343 gave them. So you're talking about a character who should be fighting the Covenant and probably should also be fighting humanity, is seemingly working still for the Covenant. So again, that is yet another moment in which it makes me go, they ignored, you know, lore for the sake of just wanting it to be cool. So the next thing I want to touch on is the artifacts themselves. Look, we all know Forerunner tech is incredibly advanced. They do shit that's almost basically magic in some ways, right? We know they were an incredibly advanced civilization. They made the Halo rings, they made the Ark. There's a whole ton of other stuff they made that's makes even the Ark look less impressive, and that's difficult to believe, right? But the thing is, this artifact that is shown in the TV show, I think is nothing more than a plot device that does whatever, like in the first episode. All Master Chief needed to do was touch it, and it made this giant energy blast that somehow powered up the Pelican, or the Condor, excuse me, and knocked away all the UNSC personnel, including members of Silver Team, right? And so it does that, and you go, okay, so it creates an energy field. It also happens to give Master Chief back his memories because, you know, for some odd reason. And then, and then it also happens to be able to communicate with the other blessed ones throughout the universe. And so it feels like it feels less like a piece of Forerunner technology and more like something the writers just did to, make the plot move forward. Because if it's not for that ability for it to talk to blessed ones, guess what? Makee doesn't ever find out where the UNSC was keeping this artifact. That never happens, which means is, but then again, it's pointless because of what happens at the end of the show, in which the UNSC gets the artifact back. And so everybody's back to where they started. Humanity has the artifact, and so the Covenant want it back. And given that it's on Reach, it's only logical to assume, hey, here's the invasion of Reach. Again. But this also does bring up the question of how they're going to handle certain events moving forward, because they already changed a lot with Halsey's disappearance. Because we all know at the end of the first season, she had a clone of herself, be the fall guy in that situation. And so when you take everything into account, you have a show that almost feels, like it's writing itself. Like the writers are just figuring out everything as they go. And you can very much tell. And so I don't have very high hopes for season 2. Is there a chance they can maybe rectify their mistakes? Maybe, but it would probably take a competent writing team, and I don't know if these writers are up to it, up to the task of fixing these things. And that doesn't even begin to mention that should characters like the Arbiter, make an appearance. And that's a character I like. I don't want to see the Arbiter get ruined by these morons. So, I'm going to say this much. I'm going to be wrapping this video up, right? And my general thought is this show is a poor adaptation of Halo. They ignore, the lore of the past 2 decades. They ignore, what the audience want. People don't want a military political drama. They don't want that. What they want is something akin to Judge Dredd or The Mandalorian, where you have your badass masked character doing what he needs to do, right? Working alongside Cortana, right? That's what people want to see. And as I've said, there have been plenty of films and television shows that have done these type of characters before. So again, we're at this point where I feel like the show is going to go in a direction that feels, like something nobody wants. Even those, I feel as if those who do enjoy the show, even they have to admit, even as a generic sci-fi show, it still falls flat on its face. It's one of those bad sci-fi shows you'd see on the Sci-Fi Channel. And quite frankly, I think those shows may be better written at times than this one. Because again, you had Makee, character dies at the end. Master Cheeks, he is what he is at this point. Cortana went from being, happy-dappy and going from, I want to kill Master Chief and take over his body, to, okay, I'm willing to work with you and feel hesitant because the plot requires me to, right? While Jen Taylor's performance is probably one of the better aspects of this show, it's not enough to save it. And so, I will end it with this. If you like the show, I don't care if you like it. I've never been that kind of person. If you like the show, great. However, you have to be willing to admit this much. The show is not good. That is the thing I've always stressed to people. You can like something that is awful. Guess what? I like some of the Transformers movies. Yes, the Michael Bay ones. I actually agree with him on some points. See what I mean? We all like things that may not be popular, that may not be good, right? If you like this TV show, nobody's going to say you're a bad person for liking it. But you have to be willing to admit it's not perfect. It has problems that need to be rectified in order for this thing to be revived in any capacity. And unfortunately, they're probably going to do a worse job than 343 did with Cortana in Halo 5. And if you do a worse job than them, all I can say is, God help you. And before the video officially ends, I want to leave you off with one last clip that truly summarizes how I feel about this show.
Heresy! Remove this filth! Take cover!